Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome again to your favorite show. And certainly it's a good afternoon for us. It's been a wonderful week. I must say, extremely hot. We hope that, the rains have been flirting with us. I just don't understand why it doesn't rain, but hopefully very soon we shall get the rains.
And there you are again on a hot day wearing a long sleeved shirt that's fully buttoned up.
Yeah, 'cause I'm a gentleman. What is it that they say? Gentleman is no weather. Right? And we're having
fashion is
hot
painful.
tea.
Well, at least you've got you've got cold water with ice in it to cool you down along the way.
It's the tea I'm actually having, Kericho tea. But we've got a special guest today, very special, not just somebody that knows what they're talking about, but is lovely. We hardly get females on our screen. And as you can see, behind the screen, on screen, it's a lot of male energy. You're very brave. You're a very brave woman to be here with us. Her name is Rachel Adams, and we'll get into what she actually does. But welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
How come you're so brave? Why are you brave?
Courage is in season. Listen, you have to be courageous, especially in the kind of world we're in. But
Interesting.
Well, we're not pandering. She's not here because she's a woman. She's here because she's got a lot of interesting contributions to make to our show, and we're very excited to have the conversation that's going to ensue.
Yeah. No, I'm actually looking forward to it. I think there's a lot for us to discuss, and there's a lot that we can learn, and we're certainly going to push back on a lot of things. And to the audience, just please engage with us. Your questions, your analysis, and your contributions, we really, really appreciate them. More than 4,000 subscribers. The tribe is growing.
Which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Last week you had a very interesting show with Alfred.
Yes. An actual
I was
economist,
sad.
unlike
Some
you.
of us. I was sad that I wasn't here, but
Yeah.
it was very interesting.
No, it was good to have him. I think he redeemed himself. Some people think he's a closet socialist or communist, but I actually think, I don't judge him so harshly. It was just one of those spur of the moment things. We were having a little debate on Twitter the night before, and then I just said, look, you know what? Why don't you come through to the show? And he was kind enough to make time, and we had an interesting conversation.
Yeah, no, it certainly was. Maybe let's talk about what you're drinking.
Yeah, so I've got a bottle of...
You've been excited. I mean, you should tell the audience that
this is
since we started, you've just been
cooing about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's whiskey tends to be dry in terms of on the spectrum of dry to sweet, tends to be very dry. But even in the dry universe, you can have some sweetness, and those are the kind of whiskeys that I like. And this is particularly interesting because it was matured in 4 casks, all of which imparted a bit of sweetness to it. So it's my favorite kind of whiskey. It's a new release from the House of Macallan, which is a well-established, really great house. And it's a travel exclusive called Quest. It doesn't come with an age statement. And I'm very excited about trying it so far. Just
does it cost more than a cow?
No, definitely not. It doesn't cost more than a cow. We had a very interesting debate on the cow versus the iPhone. I'm more likely to go with an iPhone than a cow. I don't know whether you.
She's actually not an ex.
You're not?
I'm not an ex.
Wow. That's.
We'll get
There's
into
too
that.
much energy there for me to process on a regular day. So
So what we're actually going to have is we're going to have a creature tea. So Rachel, it turns out, is a tea of Shiando. So maybe you could actually describe to us, or what happens to you when you have tea, and especially Kenyan.
And I
Kericho.
love Kericho Gold. Every time I pass by the airport in Nairobi, I always pick up a box of Kericho Gold black tea. And they've now introduced, I don't know when they introduced them, but I saw them the last time I was in the airport, the flavor teas.
Yes,
the morning
the
tea,
green,
the ginger and lemon.
Yes, they have.
I just love tea. It just warms you up. Wakes
does.
you up. I think it's amazing.
Butterflies in the stomach.
Yeah.
You don't understand that feeling, do you?
Look,
It's like
I'm a coffee guy.
Yeah.
I will occasionally have tea in the evening if because I'm trying to avoid the caffeine and which will keep me up. But for the most part, I'm a Americano espresso kind of guy.
So while I pour the tea, maybe you can introduce yourself to the audience. Like, who are you?
So I am, shall I start with I'm a Gweru girl, which people often find surprising. I'm born in Kadoma, grew up in Gweru. Professionally work as a leadership and transformation specialist. So I spend a lot of my time supporting leaders and organizations in conversations about leadership, about people, about teams, about transformation. Academically trained as an anthropologist, and no, that is not the study of ants, because I get that a lot from people. Although the study of ants is a wonderful discipline, I actually know a few people who do. I studied anthropology, which is social and you'll be amazed what you can learn from ants. It's really incredible. But I studied anthropology, which is, in my case, cultural and social anthropology. So how human beings organize themselves, why they organize themselves that way.
So what's the difference between sociology and anthropology? I always find the two to be very similar, and I can't really tell them apart.
It's a good question. I don't know if I can answer it well. My sense is sociology looks a lot at social phenomenon from a current perspective, whereas anthropology tends to have also a historical lens.
Okay.
I could be wrong, don't quote me. But that's the sense I get of the difference between the two. Because anthropology a lot of the time is looking at what is the bedrock of societies, what makes societies what they are, their values, their norms, their traditions. What is the history, the story, the background. So
there's a lot more history.
Do you take your tea with sugar or no sugar?
Honey, if you have honey, but if not, I'll take sugar.
Okay. So,
Thank
Wizzy,
you.
can we please have some honey or sugar?
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so let me give you a bit of background on why you are actually on the show. And I actually reached out. I was like, oh, okay, so I'm out of my depth, and I think I know somebody who can get into the conversation. We put something on X because we're big on X and we love it, especially after Elon took over. It's been a comfortable, safe space for some of us.
Yes.
I know what that means. Yeah.
We were talking about entrepreneurship and personalities, and I sort of put out a picture of myself, and I said I was an introvert, which, I've got 40,000 odd followers, and everybody said, no way.
Yeah, I don't believe that you're an introvert.
You thought I was being sarcastic. And
I just thought you were making things up.
There's no way this guy is
Yeah.
He's an introvert. And then we got into a heated discussion around what actually being introverted means, and extroversion, and all the different types of personalities, and how they actually affect our career choices and everything like that.
Yeah.
So it then just cascaded into something that was beyond the initial photo, where I just said, I'm an introvert, which was huge from my perspective. It's something that I thought about for 30 minutes. Like, should I post this? Yeah?
I can understand that.
And then I posted, and this guy says, you're lying.
Interesting.
So it then got us thinking that maybe perhaps we can just talk about personalities in the marketplace. And for the audience, that's really where we want to start. We want to start just around personality and what personality is. So, the basis of personality and the study that has gone into it, what we're witnessing to start off with is a blossoming of this subsector of psychology, anthropology, sociology, everything around humanities. What really has stuck and has done popularly well is personality. So first I want to understand what is personality and why it has blossomed. Why is it such an integral study at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let me start with the back question. Why has it become so integral? I think social media has made these conversations much more available in a wider context. And as a result, it seems that it's something that has started to blossom now. But it's a conversation that has been blossoming for a very long time. I mean, Carl Jung in the early 1900s was already talking about personality. Some of his work, which is what then got developed into the Myers-Briggs type indicator, has been around for decades, and organizations have been using these assessments for decades. But the basis of personality is essentially this idea that we all have biases in the way in which we process the outside world. So essentially, there's some wiring that is unique to you, to me, although there are shared nuances within that. But there's something that's unique to you about the way you prefer or perceive or experience the world around you. And that if you can categorize what those things are and give them language, it actually empowers people to understand why they respond to the world in a particular way.
Is this something that we can change, or it's just who we are? We're born that way.
Yeah, there are different schools of psychology. I think the major ones are, there's one school of psychology that says that personality is innate, which is that you're actually born with it. And, if you ask parents, a lot of the time, they'll say to you, I could tell my child's personality even in the womb, right? They had a way in which they behaved or moved that made me think they were going to be a particular way. So there's a school that says it's innate. You come with it, and that over time it matures into a particular manifestation, right? So for example, some people say, oh, I was introvert as a child, but now I think I'm an extrovert. My sense, because I belong to the innate school personally, is I often say, I think what's happened is you've matured into your personality. So like you, I'm an introvert. I was shy. My introvert manifested as being very shy when I was a child. Now I'm not shy anymore because I've discovered what makes me comfortable. I know how to be in social environments. And so while I'm still introverted, I'm not a shy introvert, right? So you mature.
Your environment plays a part. So nature and nurture.
I think there is something about nature and nurture, but I think the question is what takes precedence, right? And so for the innate school, it's that the nature takes precedence, and then what the nurture does is that it nuances it. So similarly, if you're introvert but you grow up in a home where you're encouraged to speak up and go and talk, make friends with other people, you might then show up as less of an introvert than the child who grows up in a home where they're told you shouldn't be seen.
So that's very interesting, right? Because if you think about it, what social media has made us do, the ability of social media, or even being on YouTube channel, is as an introvert, it would have been very difficult for me to be on ZBC or CNN or,
on a show like this.
No, on this show, because we have total control.
Okay.
Of what actually happens and how the delivery actually happens. So I'm much more comfortable. And from what she's saying, this actually is a platform in which I'm able to bring out my, it has manifested itself. Although I'm an introvert, but I can speak out, and I can speak out because it's a particular platform in which I'm able to do so with great curation and greater control.
Do you think you're an introvert on X?
Well, it comes across as if I am not shy using the technical terms. Yeah. But what I wanted to find out from you is, does this make sense to you? And how has social media changed our view of, personality types and how we plays out?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that social media it's unique. People behave on social media in a way that that's highly unlikely they would do face to face. So if you look at some of the mean things that people say online, even if they felt strongly about you and they didn't like you and they disagreed, in a very visceral way with some of your views, if just the mere fact of meeting you in a coffee shop and having to engage face to face, they wouldn't be as mean as they are on social media, where you're not in front of them and it's just a screen that they're looking at, and they can say all these nasty things, and they don't have the benefit of your response in real time. Like if I say something mean to you, and your body language is going to change, your facial expression is going to change, and some part of my empathy is going to be triggered, and I might decide to use less unkind language, or So I think social media is it amplifies some of the worst aspects of our personalities, because it allows people to say things that they would ordinarily not be comfortable saying if the person was standing right in front of them.
Okay, so there are two things that you talked about, which actually is a question that I want you to answer. So there's something that he said that immediately I thought, no, that's not personality, that's character. And I want you to differentiate for us personality and character. But before you do that, just an interesting anecdote about social media that I had that I found hilarious. So it turns out actually social media is exactly what life is like. It's just a resemblance or just replicating exactly what society is like. It's just that it's a different setting. So somebody explained it this way to me, that Instagram is like going to a wedding. So lots of photos and lots of happy clapper people. And then Facebook is like going to a funeral. So
I wasn't expecting
lots of family.
Right.
Lots of family and
yes.
lots of issues. That's when they discussed a lot of family issues.
Yeah,
are
that's
discussed,
true,
right?
actually.
Yeah. And X, formerly Twitter, is a football match. Right? So there's a lot of sparring that goes on, but it's because it's a football match, and it's not because they hate each other. That's not the nature, and it's just that's the setting. The setting is we're at a football game, and naturally that's what happens. And I don't know what TikTok is, perhaps, somewhere on the, wedding, maybe a party, I don't know. But that's the idea, that actually
A raucous party.
What these platforms are is just different scenarios or different settings. But these settings, we're already comfortable with these settings already.
Absolutely.
If in Arsenal and Manchester, it's not that they hate each other, but in a football stadium, there's a certain aggression that will just naturally happen.
Yeah.
That you won't find at a wedding, that you won't find at a funeral. But just going back, sorry, that was just an interesting anecdote.
It's art imitating life.
There we go. But just explain to us, personality and character.
So personality, and by the way, the thing I must say is that the second school of thought around of psychology around personality is that it is developed.
The nurture school.
The nurture school is it's developed over time by your environment. So it's not innate, right?
Okay, yeah.
And I think that's where the character personality differences come in, because personality is these biases that it's assumed your brain naturally has and over time become hardwired. Character is about what you conscientiously build over time. You on purpose develop certain practices and ways of doing in your life that become habits over time, that become character. And that's also quite visible to other people, whereas personality isn't always visible. So that's why it surprises people that you're introverted, because that's not what's visible to people. Whereas character tends to be much more visible. But I think the two are actually intertwined.
Okay.
And I think particularly personality probably influences character in a lot of ways. So for example, one of the definitions of introversion, in fact, it's not the major definition of introversion, is that the chemical reward for stimulation for introverts is low. Right? Which is that for where an introvert gets stimulated, it doesn't create dopamine hits for them. It's likely creating a cortisol hit. It's stressful.
You're introducing a lot of concepts, and I think our audience would want to know what's a dopamine hit.
So
is that similar to what Rufaro
gets from
when he's smelling,
snuffing yeah, essentially, right? So we have a system that is producing hormones in response to stimulation externally and internally. And dopamine is a reward hormone that basically says whatever I'm experiencing, I'm fundamentally enjoying. And as a result, I want to do more of that. And for introverts, external stimulation doesn't create that sense. It actually is quite stressful to the body. It stresses out the nervous system. So as a result, in terms of how does that then affect the way people show up, is, introverts can sometimes take less risks in the world. Because for them, new experiences are something they really have to think about. Is this something that I want to spend energy on, or is it not? And so there might be more of a tendency to withdraw from social experiments than there is with extroversion, where the chemical reward for stimulation is quite high, right? So the more stimulated extroverts, the more they want. They're like, give me more.
Is that like the difference between, a lot of women, when you ask them, what do you like doing? They're like, I like traveling. And with a lot of people, it's like, no, I don't like traveling.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's first of all, it's not necessarily gender divided by gender. So a lot of people, for example, will think that more men are extroverted and more women are introverted, as an example. In other societies, in a society that's matriarchal, people may believe the opposite.
Okay.
But the truth of the matter is that it's actually not divided by gender. It's really just divided by the individual and how their nervous system has built over time, what they've inherited from their family, right? Because sometimes you can see personality in families, right? You can see the family that's flamboyant. You can see the family that's very quiet. You can see the family that tends to be quite curious. And it's not to say you can't develop other traits, but it's to say that there's something that's already there that you're starting from.
Okay. With that, there's also something that we're starting with, which is IQ, right? You see, so we've got personality, we've got character, and we've got IQ. And there's been a lot of studies that have been done around IQ. What are your thoughts on that? And how does that also
Controversial waters
itself in personality and in character?
I think it depends on how you define IQ, and I think it becomes quite contentious based on the definition. There are people who would look at it as IQ is your intrinsic ability to learn. That definition I'm comfortable with. When IQ is defined as the measurement of your intelligence, I have a problem with that, I think, a little bit. And the reason for that is I think, first of all, we've boxed in what intelligence in society is. So coming from a country like ours, you're intelligent if you can be a doctor, lawyer, accountant, etc., etc. Whereas if you're a phenomenal soccer player, that wouldn't be considered intelligence. Economists. Right? And so if you're an incredible soccer player or an incredible agronomist, or if you're an incredible thinker, philosopher, in our day and age, that's not necessarily considered intelligence. And so that's where I have a problem with when we say it measures natural intelligence. I am comfortable with a definition that says IQ is about your intrinsic ability to learn. Based on your stream of based on your stream of focus, based on what you've chosen to do with your life. What is your intrinsic ability to learn within that? Now, where personality comes in for me is you are most likely to be successful if you go towards the career that is true for your natural wiring, your natural bent.
You could say
right,
that, but
as Plato called it.
Your natural bent could be, working with people or helping people, and then you want to become a doctor, but you just don't have the IQ.
Then you're going to be a mediocre doctor, I'm very sorry to say. And I think that's the problem, is that that's why we have societies full of a lot of mediocre professionals, because people have gone into careers they actually have no business going into, as far as I'm concerned. It's a very rare group of people who can actually learn just about anything.
Well, that's where IQ comes in, right? That you're higher the IQ, the ability to grasp complexity and the ability to learn as many concepts as possible, as quickly as possible. Because I think that I'm going to push back. I actually believe in IQ, but I think that IQ does not speak to someone's character or someone's personality or whether or not they will be successful.
Yes,
that's actually not. I think that what's that Shona saying about Mapudziano Wira Kusina Hari? That actually.
Do you actually know it? I feel like you just went
but the basically sometimes people get all this talent that they have no conscientiousness or discipline to actually
play it out. So just because you've got the highest IQ doesn't mean you're going to be the most successful.
Absolutely.
And because it's an ability that you have, you've been blessed with it, but you may actually not do anything with it. So, but I think that IQ lends itself very well, if you've got a higher IQ, lends itself very well in dealing with complexity.
Right.
And if you then have a certain personality, like high in conscientiousness, so high in IQ, high in conscientiousness, I think that it increases the chance of you being successful. But what tends to happen is people with high IQ tend to also be lazy, right? So then it doesn't lend itself.
Yeah.
And I think that's where you are correct, that maybe personality and character can take you further than just high IQ. Low IQ also, it just means that there's certain things that you just cannot do, no matter what we try, no matter how much we teach you, right? But the caveat, which I wanted to explain, is that just because you've got a high IQ, but you're not reading, you're not learning, then your IQ is mapudza kusnahari. Because you are this intelligent person, but you're not grasping as many concepts as you should. You're not in school.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? You are somewhere in the backwaters and doing absolutely nothing. Absolutely. And you're not even hardworking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no matter what you do, no matter how high your IQ is, if you're not hardworking, it's just not going to happen. Right? So I'm of the school of thought that I think that those that don't believe in IQ, I think that they're doing us a disservice, because I do admit it's an area that perhaps still needs a lot of nuances and a lot of research in for us to understand. But I think we understand enough that if you've got a certain IQ, you've got the ability to handle as many complex things as possible. And which comes to the 21st century, which I think is very interesting, which is we're no longer boxed, right? So here we are on a podcast, and touch wood, perhaps this will become very profitable for us, and this is all we can do. But we're able to do so many things at the same time. And I think that ability speaks to the complexity of the world, and that the world does not box us anymore. But I think that it would be very difficult if you've got a low IQ and you don't have the personality and you haven't built the character.
No, absolutely. I think it's a dance between those three things and possibly many other things, right? I do think where I struggle with IQ, to your point about the collective of how much exactly complexity you can process in the world, is sometimes I also feel like there's certain complexities I don't need to process. I can collaborate with somebody who can process those complexities. And that's why I run into problems, right? I'm just like, I don't think I need to be a jack of all trades. I'd rather be a master of one, or maybe two or three. And I think part of character, part of personality becomes your ability to collaborate with people across the board, which is what makes societies successful, or organizations successful.
What do you think?
Yeah, the IQ argument is actually quite controversial. There's a school of thought that thinks that IQ tests aren't really that good at measuring intelligence. What they're really good at is measuring lack of intelligence. So if you... So they're very useful. so they're very useful for,
separating the chaff from the wheat.
From, like if you score lowly on an IQ test, then that you have a problem. But the higher scores don't actually speak to necessarily much higher levels of intelligence, because that's where the complexity then comes in. Because people who are average, sometimes the reasons why they don't score as highly as the people who are exceptional is maybe their lived experience just didn't allow them to learn certain things, or that would have made them perform better in the IQ test. Whereas, the people who score really lowly, it's just, it speaks to real challenges in their capacity to grasp simple concepts and learn. So that's what, the school of thought that I subscribe to, that it's really useful to tell, like if you're hiring, for example, in a business and you're doing these psychometric tests, I'm definitely going to be focused more on people who score very lowly on the IQ test and screen those out. But I'm not going to read too much into those who score very highly.
Okay, so you bring two concepts that we need to discuss. So the first thing is the psychometric tests and boxing people, right? And the usual boxing, and we'll just use one particular personality test that's done. That's the Myers-Briggs personality test, and it does box people. Yeah. And we, I've written a lot of these personality tests, and I've gone through, companies that you do a psychometric and you do all this. Yes. Right? Yes. Maybe explain to us, like, can you prepare for a personality test?
I love
Like,
the
okay,
question. Yeah.
this is an accounting job. So I know the type of personality that they want. So when I'm answering these questions, this is how I should do it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so just give us a bit of background on what Myers-Briggs is and just how it is developed, and then go into the nuances.
Right. I do want to say something to what Farah was saying earlier, though, because I think it's such an important point. I love that you're making the distinction between, if I got somebody with low IQ, I probably wouldn't hire them. But if I got somebody with high IQ, I wouldn't think too much about it. I wouldn't make lots of assumptions. But I do think we should also not make lots of assumptions about people with low IQ too. Because if you think about how the IQ test was initially famously used in France, was to measure kids to see where they were struggling. Right? The intention was, if I measure your IQ and it's low, then it means you're struggling. How can I help you to not struggle? It doesn't mean that you're doomed to stay there. And I think the problem I have is with somebody measures low on IQ and you assume, okay, that must mean you're doomed to stay there. Versus you haven't had exposures to perhaps a certain world or way of thinking that makes it easy for you to answer this kind of question. And I went to government schools my entire childhood, right? High school, primary school and high school. And they were wonderful schools, don't get me wrong. They were absolutely incredible. But when I compare it to my partner who went to a private school, the plethora of things that he was exposed to gave him a set of skills that I wasn't necessarily given, that actually in some contexts may have made me come across quite poor. You might have thought I wasn't a very intelligent person. So for example, in fact, we didn't have any white kids in my school. I think we had five in my primary school and 2 in my high school. And I think characteristically they were poor, and that's why they were there in the schools. But the point is, it didn't give me social intelligence, for example, to speak across culture. And so you put me in an environment where I'm being interviewed by a white person, I might come across quite dull. And the reason is because stereotype threat kicks in, which means I'm now so nervous that I'm going to confirm a negative bias about myself. Right? About my accent, about the way that my accent didn't sound like this before, by the way, right? It's changed over time because of exposure to different parts of the world. But you might have judged me very harshly. And I think that's the problem I have with IQ. You scored low IQ and therefore that must mean, because sometimes it's just exposure. But personality, to answer your question around the Myers-Briggs. The Myers-Briggs type indicator, like I said, came out of the work of Carl Jung, where he started to do work around personalities and seeing the ways in which people responded differently to the external environment. And then it was further developed by a mother-daughter duo, Myers-Briggs, and that's where it gets the name from. But over time, it's been worked on by numerous psychologists globally to come to be what it now is, the type indicator that it now is. And it basically measures 4 things: where you draw energy from, how you process information, how you make decisions, and how you organize yourself in the world. So, and if you essentially think about it, at least the way I process it is that's the way life works, right? You first of all have to have energy to do what you need to do. Then each and every moment of the day, you're processing information and asking yourself, do I trust this information? Then you make decisions about that information. Then you organize yourself around the decisions that you've made. And so it's essentially looking to categorize how different people have preferences within those four dimensions.
Okay. So I've taken one, and I'm an INTJ.
Oh.
Does that surprise you?
What does that mean?
No, it doesn't surprise me at all.
INTJ.
Maybe explain to him what an INTJ means.
So he's an introvert, which essentially means he draws energy from being alone, and that the chemical reward for stimulation is low.
Would you disagree with that?
No, well, given the amount of time that you spend with other people, I have question marks about their characterization.
Okay.
So let's go deep into that. Introversion isn't about your ability to interact with other people. It has nothing to do with that.
Okay.
It has to do with where do you draw energy. And introverts draw energy from being alone. That's where they get their charge, so to speak. And then they can go out into the world. They can be very talkative. They can, in fact, be very annoyingly talkative, especially if they're active.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Because like I said, it doesn't necessarily translate into shyness, as an example, which tends to happen to younger introverts, I find. And so that's introversion. Intuition or intuitiveness essentially means that the information you trust is information based on gut or hunch.
Okay.
And into the future. So the opposite of intuitors are sensors. They work with information that's historical or present. So if it's happened in the past and there's evidence of it, if it's happened in the present, there's evidence of it, I trust it. Intuitors are quite comfortable to go, if I can imagine it, I trust it. If I can see a new world, I trust it. That information is valid to an intuitor. Whereas a sensor might likely question that information. Well, where's your proof? Where is the evidence?
So the sensor is data driven and the intuitor, it loves anecdotes.
Sometimes people say it that way, actually. They say intuitors meaning, less than anecdotes. They look for meaning. How do the dots connect in life? Whereas sensors are sort of A, B, C, D, sequential. It's very straightforward. It's to the point, right? And then thinkers versus feelers, and you're a T, so he's a thinker. These people make decisions based on hard logic versus soft logic, which is, I always say,
soft logic sounds like a euphemism for no logic.
No! And that's why it's important to differentiate. No. These guys are not moved by your tears, essentially. They will make if they're in a situation where they have to make a decision, they're going to use cause and effect reasoning. You did something, let's say you did something wrong or you did something right based on their assessment. What would be the common sense decision I would need to make based on this? Your tears are interesting, but they're not relevant. Whereas feelers will make decisions based on soft logic, on relationship and connection and values, and what do I feel about the way you are responding to the situation. So your tears may actually move a feeler, right? It's not to say that their logic is not logic, though. It's just soft logic. They're working from a different kind of logic.
I don't know.
So this is interesting, right? What do you think?
I don't think soft logic is logic.
No. What do you think? Everything that she has explained, does that explain my personality? Do you think, because you've interacted with me for over 20 years?
Yeah, so the I is for introvert.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's actually made an interesting point that you can be an introvert and very talkative.
Yeah.
So that's and I think for the longest time that's probably where my misunderstanding of introversion has been, because this is about when you're interacting with other people, how expressive are you? And he's a very expressive individual, so it doesn't come across as an introvert. You know, if you think about introversion in terms of how loud you are, then he would fail that test miserably. But he does spend a lot of time reading, researching.
Yeah.
So if that's the fundamental basis for introversion, that you get energy from spending time with yourself and trying to figure things out, then that will be true. And the N is for
intuition.
I think I tend to agree with that. Tinashe is definitely a thinker. He's not a person who's moved by soft logic. So that applies. This is why we're not woke.
Well, we'll get into that. But
logic is the thing I'm taking away from this, which I fundamentally disagree with, but I understand where you're coming from.
It's a nice way. It's a good euphemism. And then the G.
The J.
Oh, okay.
So that's the way we organize ourselves in the world.
Okay.
So judges tend to have a very planned approach to meeting deadlines. We say they like to be in control of a situation, which is essentially that they like to be on top of things. That's the way in which they will tend to organize themselves in life. Whereas perceivers, which is the opposite, have a very spontaneous approach to meeting deadlines. So they tend to like to experience the world, not control it. The interesting thing, I think the interesting distinction, especially in business with these two people, is that judges, when they are organizing themselves, they're quite comfortable to start a project before they have all of the information. So if a deadline is here and they're starting here, they're quite comfortable to start and figure it out as they go. Perceivers are the opposite. If they have a deadline, they're sort of saying, I want to wait until I have all the information and I feel like I am ready to do what I need to do before they start. And so they tend to start closer to the deadline, and they tend to then be called procrastinators. But really, it's that these people are often, unless you really have a procrastination problem, which people with ADHD, for example, might tend to have, but you essentially want to make sure you're clear on what you're trying to do first. And then usually the deadline is impetus to say, well, I need to be clear at this point. And then they start working right towards the end and they have like a mad rush towards the end.
So let me tell you, that's something that's interesting on 2 points. What you're saying is actually very true. So what I tend to do, especially when I write, it's a tool that I was given earlier on, and I find it very useful, is that I write it in my head first. Like I argue with myself in my head, right?
Yeah.
So I could go for days
Arguing in your head.
arguing in my head. And then just before the deadline, then I can just write it because it's now very clear in my head. And I have the opposing arguments and everything in my head.
Yes.
So the most important bit is the time when I'm arguing in my head, not the writing. The writing is like the easiest bit.
Right.
But it's the arguing.
the
If
getting.
it does not make sense in my head, it's very difficult for me to put it on paper.
Which means you're a P and not a J.
Really?
Yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people self-assess or, because their assessment, it measures you based on your answers to the questions, right? And so many people answer with bias for J. And that's because society has told us that extroverts, sensors, thinkers, judges make the best leaders. So people tend to answer with bias for that. Whereas actually, I find a lot of people who say their J's are actually P's.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And you would be an INTP because...
I would put him as a P as well. The way I wrap
Yeah.
the JP dichotomy around my brain
Yeah.
is I actually think of it in terms of conscientiousness. That a J is high in conscientiousness and a P is low in conscientiousness.
Yeah, I'm definitely low in. So when you lose the big 5 personalities, I'm low in conscientiousness, but high, like 99% in openness.
Right. Yeah.
Then high in disagreeable, which means low in agreeableness.
Yes.
Yes,
tend
this
to
is,
agree with that.
yeah, I'll agree with that completely.
But the way I have interpreted it, and which I find exciting, is that the people I am best friends with are people that I disagree with. Right? It's like at a party, if where an argument is going, that's probably where I'm at.
Yeah.
And those are the people that afterwards I connect with the most.
Yes.
So, and I tend to find that people who are high in agreeableness are at the same party and they will probably not even say a word to each other and they will connect. Right? Because that's just how they connect.
Yes.
Whereas with me, it's like the more we disagree,
The
the more I'm
better,
like,
the richer the conversation.
the richer the conversation, the more I actually want to engage.
Yeah.
And sometimes it could be days or nights where we're going back and forth,
Yes.
arguing about something.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we have a meal and we're like, man, and I say this to one of my friends. I'm like, I wish we could go back in time to those days where we used to just argue and disagree. Now we sort of
Agree. Or you've got common
so
ground.
it's like,
Yeah.
this relationship is not exciting anymore.
Interesting.
But I've taken a lot of this personality test, and what we're
Yeah.
trying to say to the audience is, so how do we organize ourselves now that we know all this? And so what does that actually mean?
Yeah. First of all, a lot of conflict in organizations is personality driven. We'll call it other things that sound more sophisticated, like I don't agree with the way you do spreadsheets, whatever it is, right? But the truth of the matter is that a lot of the time we are disagreeing on our perceptions of the world and how the world should work.
Yeah.
So, for example, intuitors tend to be more entrepreneurial, whereas sensors tend to be almost like traditionalists. They are what we sometimes call backbones of organizations. They like, if things work, if it's not broken, don't fix it, is what a mantra of an S would be. Whereas an intuitor would say, what is the future? What does the future look like? And what you often find in organizations is that the conflict point becomes intuitors can be seen as a little bit reckless, right? As a little bit too idealistic about the world. You're not, you don't have evidence for what you're saying. You're just dreaming into the future. It doesn't make any sense. And they will perceive sensors as being totally dogmatic, stuck in the past, not able to innovate. And interestingly, the power of these two personas together is that they can actually help balance each other. So I'm an N, similar to you. My partner is an S. I don't make any decision without running it past him because I know that as an N, when I get excited about the future, there's a big chance that I haven't really looked deeply into the detail of the present, right? To kind of be like, does this actually make sense in the present world and how does it relate? And when I ask him, we make a fantastic team. When egos, however, are at play in the organization, you go into, you are not good enough, you're not good enough, when actually the power of personality is that the more different the personalities are, the more innovative, good at problem solving, good at critical thinking that team is.
Okay. So there's a bit, and I want you to come in here because it's a very interesting one between a CEO and an entrepreneur. And
we argue about this all the time.
and the way it was explained to me about personalities and how, you know, two different personalities could actually work together, that's the difference between a CEO and an entrepreneur. And how it has been explained to me, and the way I've understood it and the way I've perceived it, is this way: that suppose you're on a train, the guy who gets you on the train, right? You've never been on a train. The guy who gets you on the train is the entrepreneur. The guy who drives the train is the CEO. Yeah? That's the first bit. The guy who tells you you're going to crash, right, is the entrepreneur. Because he can see the future. And he's like, guys, there's something that's just not working here. There's, whether it's in an organization or whatever, he's the guy who sees the future and he says, guys, we're not prepared for the future.
Yes.
So they're very good at preparing for the future. They understand what the future looks like. And the guy who holds it down, who makes sure that there is a business case, who's a CEO, who's a manager type, is a different personality. They can't see the opportunities, right? They can't see that rail is a dead industry and we actually need to be flying. They can't see it. Whereas the entrepreneur is a guy who's going to see that, okay, we made money in this, but it's time for us to pivot.
Yes.
And a lot of organizations have, and this is, and I want you to come here and listen to this conversation because we want you to then articulate it in a way that the audience can understand. I'm just giving you my streams of consciousness.
Got it.
But the way it was explained to me is when you look at Fortune 500 companies, the reason why they fail is because they move from being entrepreneur-run organizations, right? So the thing that gets them into Fortune 500 is the entrepreneur who's the big idea, who's thought about these things. And then the thing that makes them stay has been the CEO, who's a certain personality. But the reason why Fortune 500 companies don't last more than 30, 50 years is because they can't read into the future. It's a train wreck, primarily because you've got a CEO now on his own and you don't have the entrepreneur, and they're still, shipping people in shipyards, and because that's what they believe in, and the world has changed around them, but they don't have the skill set to understand the changing world. What are your views on that? Do you think that
So I think
characterizes why companies fail, why companies in the Fortune 500 eventually leave Fortune 500?
So I think the world has changed, and that dichotomy was probably true 50, 60, 70 years ago, where the entrepreneurial mindset and the CEO discipline and conscientiousness
were separate.
So you had the guy who defied convention, who had a crazy idea, raised a bunch of money, set up a company from scratch, and grew it to being a massive Fortune 500 company. And then that entrepreneur exits, and the CEO and board takes over, and this is a company that is doing really strong positive cash flows. They're paying fantastic dividends. The market loves them. So they're seized with keeping the trains running on time, and not actually looking beyond the horizon at the next big thing or the next big threat. So that's why they get disrupted and fail. And the pace of the world is changing now is such that you can't actually
separate the two.
You can't actually be an entrepreneur.
So you're saying it has to be in the same individual. It has to be the same individual.
Or the corporate has to be structured in a way that it's always going to be entrepreneurial. Yes, you do need somebody who's conscientious, who's going to dot I's and cross T's, But the world is changing at such a rapid clip.
Hold that thought, because we want to get the expert to think about this. But while you hold that thought, I want you to think about something that's currently happening, which is what's happening with Sam in Open AI.
Yeah.
Right? What's happening there with the board and the entrepreneurs, where there's this disagreement, and I think it's personality driven. But I want you to come back and then we discuss something that's actually current.
Weekend very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that's actually happening. That's current. And given what you just said, that it should be in the same organization, and yet we are seeing that actually there's contradictions within the same organization, because we cannot. And you're saying that's archaic. That should be a 70s thought.
Yeah.
They should live in the same organization.
Yeah. So ideally, if it's the same.
I want you to think about it.
Yeah.
Right? While we...
Sure.
And you help us understand this. You've heard what I've said. You've heard what he has said. Can you make sense of all this?
For me, it's that what is the quality of your awareness about where your CEO-ship, for example, makes sense in a particular current of where the organization is. So you could have been considered an entrepreneurial CEO in a gig that you had 5 years ago. And then you change gigs and all of a sudden you're no longer an entrepreneurial CEO, because the collective of your personality traits doesn't serve you well in that particular context. But in another context, it might have worked well. Let me give a phenomenal example. You're talking about the OpenAI CEO, but let's talk about Donald Trump, because he's a fascinating example of this for me. He's suspected that he's an ESTP, which is called the energetic problem solver, right? They're fantastic entrepreneurs, right? They're also fantastic troublemakers, right? They enjoy controversy. They enjoy they're rabble rousers. They're always looking for the fun ways it's happening. The White House is anything but those things, right? It's the kind of environment.
But should it be?
Well, I mean, I don't know whether it should be or not, but it currently is not, right? That's not what we consider the White House to be about, right? If you're going into the White House, we want somebody who's more even-toned, even-tempered, is more likely to be predictable on a day-to-day basis, consistent. And my sense is President Donald Trump really messed it up for himself by choosing to go in the direction of the presidency.
You're in a safe space. You can call him a man, baby.
No, actually, I don't think he is. The thing is, and that's why I disagree.
He's a brilliant man.
He's a brilliant man who was in the wrong space, which meant everything. Because as Mr.
Maybe
Apprentice,
it's the right antidote. Because maybe there's something that was wrong with the White House. Maybe there's something that's wrong with America. And what you need is the antidote. And he was the antidote.
It's possible. But given that our personalities occur within a social context, we then have other people judging and interpreting what our behaviors mean. What I'm saying is, when Donald Trump was Mr. Apprentice guy, he was phenomenal. People loved him. He was popular. He was lovable. Now you put him in the White House, he becomes a racist. He becomes, very belligerent because his persona doesn't suit the space. I think he had no business going after the presidency. I think that there were clearly a lot of things that happened in himself internally that drove him to want to go towards that. I think there was a point he was trying to prove.
Yes,
and he managed to prove it. But I also think that for me, where it matters, the CEO entrepreneurship debate is more around what is the quality of your awareness to know where you belong as the personality that you are, and where you're likely to thrive and where you're likely to perform well.
Okay, so if I get you correctly, what you're saying is what's more important, it's not the labels, but understanding our personality, then we understand our limitations.
Exactly. And our strengths.
And our strengths. Okay. Which brings me to a very interesting debate. Football. So we've talked about politics.
Yes.
We've talked about, and we want to talk about football.
Yes.
Right? And we've got two very different personalities that are at the peak. Right? And this is Twitter space.
Yes.
Where these debates are always ongoing. Amazing. And this is Messi and Ronaldo.
Okay.
If you think about their personalities, they're different. Okay. But what they've managed to achieve is phenomenal in every respect. Is it possible, after having this discussion, what do you think? What do you attribute to Messi's success and to Ronaldo's success? Is it that self-awareness?
Well, first of all, tell me, Messi, Ronaldo, what in your mind is different about them fundamentally?
Okay, so I think that Ronaldo, if you think about it, is highly conscientious. So if you look at Ronaldo's body, right? This is a man who's what, 38, 39? But
He's not a spring chicken.
he's not. He's not. Like, and he's been doing this for the last 25, 30 years, right? But when you look at his body, his physique just tells you that this guy works hard.
Yeah,
He is a hard worker. And when you look at his game, he runs the field and he's, extroverted, and he wants to be captain. He wants to be in control. I remember him specifically, I think it was Portugal, and he was on the sidelines. He was out of the game, but he was controlling what was happening because he's the captain. And he was on the sidelines and he was shouting at people and getting people riled up, because he wants to win.
Okay.
You look at Messi. Messi is a very demure, very under the parapet sort of character. He is the antithesis to Donald Trump. Yeah, just from a personality perspective. But my gosh, just beautiful football, just very talented. And what he's been able to achieve, even with that very introverted, very under the radar sort of character or personality, has been able to achieve a lot. So both different personalities,
absolutely,
but
same
have
field.
achieved same field, but have achieved the best. So where I'm going with this is, we could be very different personalities, and we can still be CEOs or entrepreneurs. But what makes us great, and maybe I'm answering my own question, is the ability, self-awareness is actually otherwise then you're just acting out your
That's
emotions.
exactly right. No, that's exactly right, because people ask the question all the time, are leaders born or made? And I always say that I think that it's both, right? You're born with the natural traits that you have, and then you make what you make of them. Okay. And those two people sound to me, I don't follow soccer very much, but they sound to me like two people who have figured out how to make of what their natural talent is into something really profoundly successful. And it actually didn't matter whether they were extroverted or introverted. It was the self-awareness around
makes them successful.
Exactly. How do I manage the dynamic of where I am? I always use this example. I don't think I have any business being the CEO of a large company. Because
why are you limiting yourself?
Because my brand of introversion, right, which can be different to your brand of introversion, is that I get very easily drained energetically. And number two, I have no desire to change that. You might have a desire to change. I have no desire to change that. Okay. And to be a CEO, as you know, requires that you are a helicopter above everything that is happening in the whole conversation. All conflict is coming in your direction. All strategy is coming in your direction. All conversations coming. There has to be a level of energy that you're willing to apply.
How much of it is defined by gender? How much of it is... Okay, so what are you? Are you an IN...
I'm an INTP.
INTP. Okay. All right. How much of it is gender driven and how much of it is personality driven? Because two individuals, you and I.
Yeah.
And I'm just taking the I.
Yes.
We're both introverts,
right?
Yeah. And your reaction to being CEO. My reaction to being CEO is like, hell yeah. Let's take it. Yeah. And your reaction to it of a large business is, no. I'm actually comfortable in the space that I'm in.
Yeah.
How much of it is gender and how much of it is just my different type of introversion?
It's both and. Because, there's enough research that shows that men are more likely to go towards opportunities than women are, especially when both people, let's say, hold the same qualification. And let's say both are 50% prepared for this position of CEOship. The male is more likely to say, I'm going to go for it. The woman is more likely to say, do I have the right skills? Maybe let me think about that a little bit more. But then personality can change that, right? Which is that, a woman who has the 50%, but at the same time has a more risk-taking personality might then say, actually, I will go for it. I don't have a very risk-taking personality, right?
So we'll get into that.
Yeah. So I want to push back a little bit on a bunch of things that you guys said.
Yeah. But first, I want you to explain the open AI and what's happening with the board and the entrepreneurs and the conflict there.
So I think it's an interesting fight that's happening there because the entrepreneurs, Sam Altman and Greg Brookman, these are very aggressive technologists that want to push this thing as quickly as possible. That's just their natural disposition as technologists. And also, I think they've got a financial incentive as well to grow this thing as quickly as possible. Now, one of the things that's weird about the OpenAI board is that their mandate is not actually to drive shareholder value or to create wealth.
Non-profit.
Their mandate is to worry about the harm that artificial intelligence can potentially do to humanity. Yes. So their mandate is actually opposed to the entrepreneurs running the place. They want to slow everything down and make sure things are safe. That's their mandate. And the entrepreneurs are technologists who want to push the coolest.
But that's exactly what you were arguing. That the contradictions must exist in the organization. I think it's a nice contradiction to have in an organization.
Yeah. So ideally the safety crowd and the progressive or the technology crowd should be aligned.
Yes.
And I think that that alignment got dislodged.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that the board said in firing Sam Altman is that he's not actually telling us the truth about what's actually going on. So clearly the relationship between the two broke down.
Okay, I want to push back because I wanna because your statement was a very bold statement.
Yeah.
Or let's call it for what it is, a very bombastic statement, because you said it's archaic. The idea that you can have a CEO or an entrepreneur that are separate is archaic. What should happen ideally in the 21st century is both must exist
within the same organization.
And here we have
the same personality.
And here we have a current situation where both are existing in the organization. So whoever was dreaming about this was exactly, using your thinking. Yeah. So the investors thought, you know what? I think what we need to do is to reconcile the two and have them in the same organization.
Yes,
absolutely. And they did,
and
they were phenomenally successful. Well, they're a victim of their own success, if you think about it. Yeah, because they're at the cusp of something really great.
Absolutely.
And then that's when it breaks down. So maybe, and this is the question I'm putting to you, is maybe that old institutional understanding that rather than have these in the same organization, an organization should just naturally evolve. That don't think about the harm at the beginning. Be an entrepreneurial firm, right? So break as many. Exactly.
Move quickly and break things.
Move quickly and break as much as you can, right? And then probably pass on the baton to someone else or some organization that's going to come and really think about the harm, right? And reconciling the two in the same organization, maybe we're not yet there.
Well, ideally, that's where we should be. We should actually be able to reconcile the two.
We are unable to.
And then,
because there's no awareness, the quality of awareness is low. That becomes the issue. When these kinds of fights happen, it's because somebody perceives their perception to be the ultimate reality versus acknowledging and understanding that they could be two perceptions that are interconnected that can work well together. And that's how we get into conflict. Every perception you have is your hallucination of the world. That's really what it is. Neuroscientists have told us this ad nauseum. There is an objective reality on the outside, but the minute it starts to interact with the self, it ceases to be objective. It's subjective, right? And so the people who are progressive, to use your words, the people who are sort of saying, let's go break everything, have a particular way of seeing the world. And the people who say, no, let's keep it safe. Let's make sure that we're not breaking too many things. Some things are sacred. Some things shouldn't be touched. Are also perceiving the world in a particular, but it's their subjective reality. Those two realities are both true. It's a both and.
So just to add one last comment there. If you look at today in the Fortune 500, the world's most successful companies, right? Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, they're all run by tyrants who are not really accountable to anybody else. They have controlling stakes. They're chairmen of their businesses. They're also the CEO, and they just drive the thing. And that's why they've been phenomenally successful. And the Fortune 500 companies that have actually slowed down and are on their way to extinction, it's where the entrepreneur who founded the business exited, decades ago. And you now have a CEO who's accountable to a board and all these other stakeholders. And he doesn't have the same drive and skin in the game and power, frankly. He has to accommodate so many different voices before he, to move forward.
Okay. All right, producers jumping up and down. So this is end of part one. As you can see, we've got lots to discuss. I'm looking at, the things that we thought we would cover, and we've
barely scratched the surface.
Yeah, about half the stuff. So we will please join us in part two. As you can see, this is a riveting discussion. But thank you very much for doing this, because you know what it's doing? It's giving the necessary dimension to the conversation that we usually have. So if this was a debate between Rufaro and I, which I think is the debate that the world is going through, whether it's the White House, whether it's OpenAI, whatever it is, it's two-dimensional. And perhaps the third dimension is what we have. Yeah. And I actually like this, right? Because we are getting an expert view on why this conflict is happening. Because my natural inclination with this conflict is let's go back to what it was like in the 70s, because it worked. His is like, no, it didn't work. We need to, right? But how do we then reconcile the two? And I think that's where you come in. And what's going to be interesting in part two, and I want you to get into this, because we have a particular view on national psyche and how nations and their psyche affects society and affects how well they do. And that's something that I think you'll be interested in. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful weekend and join us in part two next week. Cheers.